Do you see this as becoming Trump's war now, or we're not quite there yet?
I think it's Trump's war simply because he was foolish enough to be drawn into it. Uh, if you listen to Trump during the election and in the immediate aftermath of the election, he was saying all the right kinds of things. But very shortly thereafter, he was besieged by people who convinced him that I think of several things. First of all, you can't do anything, President Trump, unless it looks like a win for you. In other words, if you're going to go sign an agreement, it has to be a win for you. Everything has to be a win. Everything is seen as a contest in the private sector sense. This is a real estate salesman. So he sees everything as I've got to win. I can't lose. Uh, I had urged him to just end all aid to this heinous regime in Kiev and withdraw all U.S. military personnel and civilians from Ukraine. Period. Get out. End it. Tell the Europeans we're out. We'll be happy to host a peace conference where you and the Russians can sit down and work out future borders, but we're not going to stay. He's now done a 180-degree turn, and he's going in the opposite direction. I think it's a serious mistake because I don't think Zelensky will last. And as soon as Zelensky is out of business, that'll be the end of this agreement.
Well, I was also noticed that with the 9th of May celebration, there's another ceasefire now. We just had a ceasefire in which the Russians announced unilaterally ceasefire over Easter. And of course, now we have on 9th of May. So some would see this as being well, a very holy or sacred day for Russia. That is, being now a very Christian country, but also, of course,
Yeah,
the importance of 9th of May in their historical memory. Or do you see this as being a test run for proving that there is a possibility to end this war? That not a taste, but testing out the waters, whether or not the opponents, that is the Europeans, Ukrainians, and Americans, are actually interested in pursuing further peace.
I think President Putin has made it very clear that this war is going to end on the terms that Russian military power impose. That's his view. He said it will be dictated by the logic of the battlefield for all intents and purposes, and I think he's right. We certainly can't bring anything to this any longer. Uh, Before Trump, we were a co-belligerent, actively doing everything in our power to harm Russia. The hope was that President Trump would end that and normalize relations with Russia. And indeed, there were meetings that indicated that might happen. That's been lost now. And as a result, President Putin spoke to the business community in Russia a few weeks ago and said, let forget the sanctions, forget the problems with the West. This is not going to change. So we are going to look elsewhere. And that brings in, the SEC and the BRICS and so forth. In other words, there are other people we're going to do business with because the West is just not a reliable partner. Now, that doesn't mean that that will never change. I think he's a smart man and he knows that Europe is in great turmoil. How much longer can these confused Germans wander around in darkness in Berlin? I mean, the government there with this man Merz, who could not become chancellor, and I think that's a blessing, they are engaged in national suicide. That will end. And the only people that are opposed to national suicide in Germany are the AfD. And I think that's the right position, by the way, for them to take. But the left has done everything in its power. The Soros dominated elites running the show in Western Europe. They're all trying desperately to portray the AfD as a national German party, as a throwback to National Socialism. I don't think that'll work much longer. With every passing day, AfD becomes more powerful because the average German sees that his country is being destroyed. Eventually, it will be stopped. I think you will eventually see tremendous change in France. I think it will come to England, and then it will spread elsewhere. We've already seen, changes come about in many countries. You've got Fico in Slovakia, you've got Orban in Hungary. These people were always very sober-minded very early on. I think that's going to spread. I think you're going to see change in the right direction in Poland. People there are looking at the West and, as I call the globalist elites, funded, educated, socialized, and created by Soros as the real threat to civilization on the European continent. So, but unfortunately, I don't see us playing a major role. I think we've marginalized ourselves.
It is interesting to see, as now we're remembering the defeat of fascism, how it's actually remembered in the historical narratives, because the German government now they labeled AfD an extremist organization, which enables or allows its intelligence agencies to effectively, well, to some extent, go after AfD, which is now the largest political opposition. Now, the argument there is that if this far right, which means that they can be seen as fascists, then you can just cancel the opposition if necessary. And of course, if the looks at the German government now and argues, no, this is fascism, this way of trying to eliminate the opposition. So it is interesting how they see it through their own prism, but no, this canceling of the opposition, this is quite extreme, especially if you see it in the context of what's happening in France and other places. But
Well, again, yes, you're a professor and you teach these things at the university. The word fascism is derived from Latin, and it's has its roots in Rome. The bundle of sticks that bound together represented unity and strength to the Roman Senate and people, with the axe in the center. Uh, we have that symbol in the United States Senate. You know, this ancient Roman symbol, which was a fascist symbol. Fascism is about unity. That's it. And you have to ask yourself, who are the people that are afraid of national unity in Germany, in France, in Britain, in all these countries? Well, these are so-called globalists. Well, what is their inspiration? And it's very, very hard to say anything other than Marxism and communism, because communism sought to destroy national identity, destroy borders, and sort of transform people into an amorphous mass of workers and consumers. That's about it. And I think the Germans, certainly since they lost the war, have allowed themselves to be transformed into this uh, quiet, uh, almost politically neutral public that marched in whatever direction the allies and government said, because they were apologizing for whatever they did during the Second World War. I think the apology tour is over, and it should be over. And I think eventually Germany will straighten out. It may not happen immediately, but it will. So what you're describing in Germany, which is reminiscent of East Germany, the Stasi, uh, snooping and surveilling people and then threatening them, I think that will fail. And I think the alternative will be a nationalist movement that will take over and say, it's Germany first now. We have to think about ourselves, our national industry, our scientific industrial development, our economy. All of that will happen. It's a matter of waiting for it. And I think, if anything, Mr. Putin is very patient and he understands the true direction that things are moving. One benefit of having been a communist at some point in your life is that you learned about this thing we call the correlation of forces. Well, the correlation of forces is very much in favor of Russia. And the correlation of forces right now favors China. It favors many countries. It does not favor us. And it does not favor Europe in its current state of mind.